The scorching Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on the Hoover Dam construction site as the morning shift began their routine maintenance work. It was July 15, 2015, and the massive concrete structure stood as imposing as ever against the Colorado River. The temperature was already climbing toward what meteorologists predicted would be another record-breaking day in the desert. Marcus Rodriguez, a seasoned construction foreman with 23 years of experience, wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed the work area. His navy blue hard hat gleamed under the intense sunlight, and his orange safety vest was already damp with perspiration despite the early hour. The crew was tasked with excavating a section near the dam's foundation where recent seismic activity had caused some structural concerns. "All right, everyone gather around," Marcus called out to his team of 8 workers. The men approached, their steel-toed boots crunching on the gravel. Each wore the standard safety gear, hard hats in various colors, reflective vests, and protective eyewear. "We're going to be working in Sector 7 today. The engineers want us to dig down about 15 feet to check the foundation integrity." Tommy Chen, a young engineer fresh out of college, adjusted his yellow hard hat and pulled out his tablet. His white button-down shirt was already showing signs of the desert heat, and he had rolled up his sleeves in a futile attempt to stay cool. "The ground-penetrating radar showed some anomalies in this area," he explained, pointing to the digital readout. "Could be nothing, but we need to be thorough." The excavation began with the rhythmic hum of machinery. The backhoe operator, Jake Morrison, had been working construction sites across Nevada for over a decade. His weathered hands guided the massive yellow machine with practiced precision, while his red bandana kept the sweat from dripping into his eyes. The bucket bit into the hard-packed earth, revealing layers of sediment that had accumulated over decades. As the morning progressed, the crew settled into their familiar rhythm. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to stretch endlessly over the desert landscape. The Colorado River sparkled in the distance, providing a stark contrast to the arid surroundings. It was nearly noon when Jake's backhoe hit something unexpected. The usual grinding sound of metal against rock was replaced by a hollow thunk that made everyone stop and look up. "Hold up," Marcus called out, raising his hand. "Jake, back it off a bit." The operator carefully maneuvered the bucket away from whatever it had struck. Tommy hurried over with his tablet, checking the depth measurements. "We're at about 12 feet down," he reported, his voice carrying a note of curiosity. Marcus grabbed a shovel and jumped down into the excavation pit. The walls of earth rose around him, creating a cool pocket of shade that provided temporary relief from the blazing sun. He began carefully scraping away dirt from the area where the backhoe had made contact. "There's something here," he called up to the crew. "Looks like metal." The other workers gathered around the edge of the pit, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and concern. In construction work, unexpected discoveries could mean anything from old utility lines to unexploded ordnance from the dam's original construction in the 1930s. Marcus continued his careful excavation, using his hands to brush away the remaining soil. What emerged was the corner of what appeared to be a metal container, heavily corroded but still intact. The surface was a mottled brown and green from years of oxidation, but the shape was unmistakably man-made. "Tommy, you better call this in," Marcus said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "This doesn't look like construction debris." The young engineer was already reaching for his radio. "Base, this is Chen at Sector 7. We've got an unusual discovery down here, requesting a supervisor on site." Within 30 minutes, the excavation site had transformed into a hub of activity. Sarah Mitchell, the site supervisor, arrived in a white pickup truck, her brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a crisp white hard hat and a navy blue polo shirt with the Bureau of Reclamation logo. Behind her came Dr. James Patterson, an archaeologist who was often called in when construction projects uncovered historical artifacts. Dr. Patterson was a tall, lean man in his 50s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore khaki pants and a light blue shirt, both practical choices for fieldwork in the desert heat. His approach to the excavation was methodical and careful, befitting someone who had spent decades uncovering the past. "Let's see what we have here, Doctor," Patterson said as he climbed down into the pit. He examined the exposed corner of the metal container with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to making sense of buried mysteries. After several minutes of careful inspection, he looked up at the assembled crew. This appears to be a footlocker or storage chest of some kind. Based on the corrosion patterns and the depth, I'd estimate it's been buried for at least 15 to 20 years. Sarah Mitchell frowned, consulting her clipboard. There's no record of any authorized burials in this area. The dam's been operational since 1936, and this section has been under federal jurisdiction the entire time. Could it be related to the original construction? Tommy asked, his engineering mind trying to find a logical explanation. Dr. Patterson shook his head. The corrosion pattern suggests this is much more recent, probably 1990s at the earliest. He paused, studying the container more closely. We're going to need to excavate this properly. There could be important historical or legal implications. As the afternoon wore on, the careful excavation continued. The crew worked in shifts, with Dr. Patterson overseeing every step of the process. The metal container gradually emerged from its earthen tomb, revealing itself to be a military-style footlocker, approximately 3 feet long and 18 inches wide. The desert wind picked up as evening approached, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of a cooler night. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, casting long shadows across the construction site. Marcus stood at the edge of the pit, watching as Dr. Patterson made the final preparations to lift the container from its resting place. Something about the discovery troubled him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. In all his years of construction work, he had never encountered anything quite like this. Tomorrow we'll transport this to the lab for proper examination, Dr. Patterson announced to the assembled group. Whatever's inside has been sealed away for nearly 2 decades. It's time we found out what someone thought was important enough to bury here. As the crew began to pack up their equipment for the day, none of them could have imagined that their discovery would soon unravel a mystery that had haunted the local community for 18 years. The metal container held secrets that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the Hoover Dam and the people who had worked there. The last rays of sunlight glinted off the corroded surface of the footlocker as it was carefully loaded onto a transport vehicle. Whatever lay inside would have to wait until morning to reveal its secrets, but the discovery had already set in motion a chain of events that would bring long-buried truths into the harsh light of the Nevada desert. The next morning brought with it a sense of anticipation that seemed to permeate the entire Bureau of Reclamation facility. Dr. Patterson had arrived early, his silver sedan pulling into the parking lot just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the desert horizon. He wore a fresh white lab coat over his usual khaki pants and carried a leather satchel filled with the specialized tools of his trade. The laboratory was a modern facility, starkly different from the rugged construction environment of the dam site. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a clean, clinical glow. The metal footlocker sat on a stainless steel examination table, looking somehow smaller and less ominous in the controlled environment. Sarah Mitchell stood nearby, her arms crossed as she watched Dr. Patterson prepare his equipment. She had traded her field clothes for a professional grey blazer and black slacks, but her expression remained as serious as it had been the day before. "Any theories about what we might find?" she asked. "In my experience, buried containers usually fall into one of 3 categories," Dr. Patterson replied, adjusting his glasses as he examined the lock mechanism. "Time capsules, hidden valuables, or evidence that someone wanted to keep hidden." He paused, running his fingers along the corroded metal. "Given the location and the apparent age, I'm leaning toward the third option." Tommy Chen entered the lab carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a manila folder thick with documents. His blue button-down shirt was wrinkled, suggesting he had spent the night researching rather than sleeping. "I've been going through the personnel records from the 1990s, he announced, setting the folder down on a nearby desk. "There are some interesting patterns." Dr. Patterson looked up from his examination of the footlocker. "What kind of patterns?" "Well, there were several unexplained incidents during that time period," Tommy explained, opening the folder and spreading out photocopied documents. "Equipment malfunctions, security breaches, and—" He hesitated, glancing at Sarah. "A missing person case that was never solved." Sarah's expression sharpened. "Missing person? I don't recall anything like that in the official records." Tommy pulled out a newspaper clipping yellowed with age. The headline read, "Local nurse vanishes near Hoover Dam." Below it was a photograph of a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, wearing a white nurse's uniform. Rebecca Martinez, age 28. She worked at the medical facility that served the dam workers. Disappeared on October 15, 1997. Dr. Patterson set down his tools and walked over to examine the newspaper clipping. What were the circumstances of her disappearance? According to the reports, she finished her shift at the medical facility around 6 p.m. and was supposed to drive home to Las Vegas, Tommy explained. Her car was found the next morning in the employee parking lot, but there was no sign of her. The investigation went on for months, but no trace was ever found. Sarah frowned, studying the photograph. I remember hearing stories about this when I first started working here, but I thought it was just local folklore. You're saying this actually happened? The police reports are all here, Tommy confirmed, tapping the folder. Detective Maria Santos led the investigation. She's retired now, but according to the records, she never believed Rebecca simply ran away like some people suggested. Dr. Patterson returned to the footlocker, his movements more deliberate now. Let's see if this container can shed any light on the mystery. He had been working on the corroded lock mechanism for the better part of an hour, applying penetrating oil and using specialized tools to coax the metal components back to life. The lock finally gave way with a sharp click that seemed to echo through the quiet laboratory. Dr. Patterson paused, his hands resting on the lid of the container. Are we ready for this? Sarah nodded while Tommy positioned himself to document whatever they might find. Dr. Patterson slowly lifted the lid, revealing the contents that had been sealed away for nearly 2 decades. The first thing they saw was a white fabric, folded neatly and placed on top of other items. Dr. Patterson carefully lifted it out, revealing it to be a nurse's uniform, complete with a name tag that read R. Martinez. The fabric was stained and discolored, but the name was still clearly visible. My God, Sarah whispered, her professional composure cracking slightly. It's really her. Beneath the uniform were other personal items, a small leather purse, a set of car keys, and a manila envelope sealed with tape. Dr. Patterson handled each item with the reverence of someone who understood that he was touching the remnants of a human life. Tommy was taking photographs of everything, his camera clicking rapidly as he documented the discovery. This changes everything, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This isn't just a historical artifact. This is evidence in an unsolved case. Dr. Patterson carefully opened the manila envelope, revealing a collection of documents and photographs. The papers appeared to be medical records, but they were unlike anything he had seen before. The photographs showed areas of the dam that were typically restricted to authorized personnel only. These medical records, Dr. Patterson said, studying the documents more closely. They're not standard patient files. These appear to be documenting some kind of systematic health issues among the dam workers. Sarah leaned in to get a better look. What kind of health issues? Respiratory problems, neurological symptoms, unexplained illnesses. Dr. Patterson read from the documents. And look at this. He pointed to a series of dates and locations marked on what appeared to be a map of the dam facility. Rebecca was documenting patterns of illness that seemed to correlate with specific work areas. Tommy set down his camera and joined them in examining the documents. You think she discovered something that someone didn't want her to reveal? It's starting to look that way, Dr. Patterson replied grimly. These documents suggest she was conducting some kind of unauthorized investigation into worker health and safety issues. The implications of the discovery were staggering. What had started as a routine construction project had uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that may have cost a young nurse her life. The metal footlocker had preserved not just Rebecca Martinez's personal belongings, but also the work that had apparently made her a target. Sarah reached for her phone. I need to contact the authorities. This is now officially a criminal investigation. As she made the call, Dr. Patterson continued to examine the contents of the footlocker. At the very bottom, wrapped in plastic, was a small tape recorder. The device was old but appeared to be in working condition despite its long burial. There's an audio recording, he announced, holding up the device. This might contain Rebecca's own account of whatever she discovered. The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of Sarah's phone conversation. The tape recorder sat on the examination table like a time bomb, holding secrets that had been buried for 18 years. Tommy stared at the device, his mind racing with possibilities. Do you think she knew she was in danger? Is that why she buried all of this? Dr. Patterson nodded slowly. It's looking more and more like Rebecca Martinez was trying to preserve evidence of something significant, something that someone was willing to kill to keep secret. The morning sun had climbed higher in the desert sky, but inside the laboratory, The atmosphere remained tense and expectant. They had uncovered far more than anyone had anticipated, and the investigation was just beginning. Detective Maria Santos had aged gracefully in the 18 years since Rebecca Martinez's disappearance, but the case had never left her thoughts. Now, in her early 60s, she wore her silver hair in a neat bob and had traded her police uniform for civilian clothes. A burgundy blouse and black slacks that spoke to her continued attention to detail. When Sarah Mitchell's call came in, requesting her presence at the Bureau of Reclamation facility, Maria felt a familiar mixture of hope and dread. The drive from Las Vegas to the Hoover Dam took her through familiar desert landscape, but this time the journey felt different. After all these years, there might finally be answers to the questions that had haunted her throughout her career and into retirement. Dr. Patterson greeted her at the laboratory entrance, his expression grave but determined. "Detective Santos, thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult for you." Maria nodded, her dark eyes taking in the sterile environment of the lab. "I've thought about Rebecca Martinez every day for 18 years. If there's finally a chance to learn what happened to her, I need to be here." The contents of the footlocker were laid out on the examination table, like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. Maria approached slowly, her trained eye taking in each item. When she saw the nurse's uniform with Rebecca's name tag, she had to pause and take a deep breath. "She was such a dedicated nurse," Maria said softly, her voice carrying the weight of memory. Everyone who worked with her said the same thing. She cared about people, sometimes more than was good for her own safety. Tommy had spent the morning setting up audio equipment to play the tape recording they had discovered. The old cassette player looked incongruous among the modern laboratory equipment, but it was their best hope of hearing Rebecca's voice after nearly 2 decades of silence. "Are you ready to hear what she had to say?" Dr. Patterson asked gently. Maria straightened her shoulders, drawing on the professional composure that had served her throughout her career. "Play it." The tape began with the soft hiss of old recording equipment, followed by Rebecca's voice, clear and determined, despite the obvious stress in her tone. "My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I'm recording this on October 14th, 1997. If something happens to me, I want people to know what I've discovered at the Hoover Dam facility." The voice from the past sent chills through everyone in the room. Here was Rebecca, speaking to them across the years, unaware that her words would not be heard for nearly 2 decades. "I've been documenting unusual health patterns among the dam workers for the past 6 months. What started as routine medical care has revealed something much more serious. Workers in certain sections of the facility are developing respiratory problems, neurological symptoms, and other health issues at rates far above normal." Sarah Mitchell leaned forward, her administrative mind already grasping the implications. She was documenting occupational health hazards. The recording continued. "I've tried to report my findings through proper channels, but my supervisor, Dr. William Hayes, has repeatedly dismissed my concerns. He's ordered me to stop documenting these patterns and to limit my reports to basic first aid incidents only." Maria's expression hardened. "Dr. Hayes, I remember him from the original investigation. He was completely uncooperative, claimed Rebecca was an overzealous employee who saw problems where none existed." Rebecca's voice continued from the tape. "I've discovered that certain areas of the dam are being used for activities that aren't in any official documentation. There are restricted sections where workers are exposed to materials that aren't listed in any safety protocols. When I tried to access these areas to conduct health assessments, I was told I didn't have clearance." Dr. Patterson was taking notes rapidly, his archaeological training helping him piece together the timeline of events. She was essentially conducting her own investigation into what appears to have been an unauthorized operation within the dam facility. The recording revealed more disturbing details. "I've photographed some of the restricted areas and copied medical records that show the pattern of illnesses. Dr. Hayes discovered what I was doing and threatened to have me fired if I didn't stop. But these workers are getting sick and someone needs to speak up for them." Tommy was cross-referencing Rebecca's account with the documents they had found. "The medical records in the footlocker match what she's describing. Look at these dates and locations. They correspond exactly to her narrative." Rebecca's voice took on a more urgent tone. "I think Dr. Hayes is involved in covering up whatever is happening in those restricted areas. I've seen him meeting with people who aren't listed as official personnel, and there are financial records that don't match the facility's stated budget. I'm going to confront him tomorrow and demand answers." Maria closed her eyes, knowing that October 15th, 1997, the day after this recording was made, was the day Rebecca disappeared. The tape continued. "If something happens to me, I want people to know that I was trying to protect the workers. I've buried copies of all my evidence in a safe place. The truth needs to come out no matter what." The recording ended with the soft click of the tape player being turned off, leaving the laboratory in heavy silence. Rebecca's words hung in the air like an accusation, demanding justice after 18 years of silence. Maria was the first to speak. "We need to find Dr. Hayes. If he's still alive, he has questions to answer." Sarah was already reaching for her phone. "I'll contact Human Resources and get his current information. If Rebecca was right about unauthorized activities at the dam, there could be ongoing safety issues we need to address." Dr. Patterson was studying the photographs Rebecca had taken of the restricted areas. These images show modifications to the dam structure that aren't in any of the official blueprints. Whatever was happening here, it was significant enough to require major construction work. Tommy looked up from his laptop, where he had been searching for information about Dr. Hayes. According to public records, Dr. William Hayes left the Bureau of Reclamation in December 1997, just 2 months after Rebecca's disappearance. He moved to Arizona and worked for a private medical consulting firm until his retirement in 2010. "And where is he now?" Maria asked, her detective instincts fully engaged. "Phoenix. He's 73 years old and appears to be living in a retirement community." Tommy paused, looking at the others. "Should we contact the authorities in Arizona?" Maria shook her head. "Not yet. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before we involve other jurisdictions. But we do need to confront Dr. Hayes with this evidence." The discovery had transformed from an archaeological curiosity into a criminal investigation that spanned nearly 2 decades. Rebecca Martinez had died trying to expose the truth, and now her carefully preserved evidence was finally seeing the light of day. As the afternoon wore on, the team continued to analyze the contents of the footlocker. Each document and photograph added another piece to the puzzle, revealing a conspiracy that had cost Rebecca her life and potentially endangered the health of countless dam workers. The desert sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, when Sarah made the decision that would bring the investigation to its climax. "We're going to Phoenix," she announced. "Dr. Hayes is going to answer for what happened to Rebecca Martinez." The drive to Phoenix took them through some of the most beautiful desert landscape in the Southwest. But none of the passengers in Sarah Mitchell's government sedan were paying attention to the scenery. Dr. Patterson sat in the front passenger seat, reviewing Rebecca's documents one final time. In the back, Detective Maria Santos stared out the window, her mind focused on the confrontation that lay ahead. Tommy Chen had remained at the laboratory to continue analyzing the evidence and coordinate with federal authorities who were now taking an active interest in the case. The discovery of Rebecca's evidence had triggered a multi-agency investigation into the unauthorized activities at Hoover Dam during the 1990s. The Sunset Manor retirement community in Phoenix was a sprawling complex of low-rise buildings surrounded by carefully maintained desert landscaping. Palm trees provided shade over walking paths, and the architecture reflected the southwestern style that was popular in Arizona. It seemed like a peaceful place to spend one's golden years, far removed from the secrets and conspiracies of the past. Dr. William Hayes lived in Building C, apartment 247. He was a tall, thin man who had aged considerably since his photograph in the 1997 personnel files. His once dark hair was now completely white, and he moved with the careful gait of someone whose body had been worn down by time. He wore a simple grey cardigan over a white shirt and dark slacks, the picture of a quiet retiree. When he opened his apartment door and saw the 3 visitors standing in the hallway, his face went pale. Even after 18 years, he recognized Detective Santos immediately. "Dr. Hayes," Maria said, her voice carrying the authority she had maintained even in retirement, "we need to talk." Hayes glanced nervously up and down the hallway, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. "I don't know what you want, but I have nothing to say to you people." Sarah stepped forward, showing her Bureau of Reclamation identification. "Dr. Hayes, I'm Sarah Mitchell, current site supervisor at Hoover Dam. We've discovered some evidence that relates to Rebecca Martinez's disappearance, and we need your cooperation." The mention of Rebecca's name seemed to hit Hayes like a physical blow. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment He looked every one of his 73 years. "Rebecca?" he whispered. "I wondered when this day would come." Dr. Patterson held up the manila envelope containing Rebecca's evidence. "She documented everything, Dr. Hayes. The unauthorized medical experiments, the cover-up of worker health issues, your involvement in the conspiracy, it's all here." Hayes stared at the envelope as if it contained a venomous snake. After a long moment, he stepped aside and gestured for them to enter his apartment. The living space was modest but comfortable, with family photographs on the mantelpiece and medical journals stacked on a reading table by the window. "Sit down," Hayes said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I suppose it's time I told someone the truth." The three visitors took seats on the couch while Hayes settled into his recliner. For several minutes, he sat in silence, staring at his hands. When he finally began to speak, his voice was heavy with the weight of 18 years of guilt. "Rebecca was right about everything," he began. "There were unauthorized activities at the dam, and workers were getting sick because of them. But it wasn't my idea, and I wasn't in charge." Maria leaned forward. "Then who was?" "The Department of Energy had a classified research project running at the dam from 1995 to 1998, Hayes explained. They were testing new materials for nuclear waste containment, using some of the restricted areas within the dam structure. The workers who were getting sick had been exposed to experimental compounds that were supposed to be safe." Dr. Patterson frowned. "But they weren't safe." Hayes shook his head. "The preliminary results were promising, but there were unexpected side effects. Respiratory problems, neurological symptoms, exactly what Rebecca was documenting. When she started asking questions and demanding access to the restricted areas, the project supervisors panicked. Sarah's expression was grim, so they decided to silence her." "Not at first," Hayes said, his voice growing stronger as he continued his confession. "They tried to discredit her, make it look like she was an overzealous employee seeing problems where none existed. That's why they ordered me to dismiss her concerns and limit her access to medical records." Maria's detective instincts were fully engaged. "But Rebecca didn't give up." "No, she didn't. She was too dedicated, too concerned about the workers' welfare. When she threatened to go public with her evidence, they knew they had to take more drastic action." The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Hayes seemed to be gathering his courage for the most difficult part of his confession. "On October 15, 1997, Rebecca confronted me in my office. She had all her evidence with her, the medical records, the photographs, everything. She demanded that I help her expose what was happening, or she would go to the authorities herself." "What did you do?" Dr. Patterson asked quietly. "I called the project supervisor, a man named Colonel Richard Stone. He came to the facility that evening with 2 other men. They said they just wanted to talk to Rebecca, to explain the national security implications of what she had discovered." Maria's hands clenched into fists. "But that's not what happened." Hayes shook his head, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Rebecca refused to be intimidated. She told them she had already hidden copies of her evidence, and that the truth would come out whether they silenced her or not. That's when—" He paused, unable to continue. "That's when they killed her," Maria finished for him. Hayes nodded, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. "They made it look like she had simply disappeared. Her car was moved back to the parking lot. Her personal belongings were removed from her apartment. Colonel Stone told me that if I ever spoke about what had happened, I would face the same fate." The confession hung in the air like a death sentence. After 18 years, the truth about Rebecca Martinez's fate was finally revealed, but it brought no comfort to those who had loved and missed her. Sarah was already reaching for her phone. "We need to contact the FBI immediately. This is a federal crime involving multiple agencies." Dr. Patterson was studying Hayes with the analytical eye of someone accustomed to uncovering buried truths. "Where is Rebecca's body, Dr. Hayes?" The old man looked up with haunted eyes. "They told me they disposed of it in the desert, somewhere it would never be found. I don't know the exact location." Maria stood up, her professional composure finally cracking. "You let them murder an innocent woman and then kept quiet about it for 18 years. You could have prevented this, could have saved her life." "I was terrified," Hayes said, his voice breaking. "They made it clear that anyone who interfered with the project would be eliminated. I had a family, children. I was a coward, and Rebecca paid the price for my cowardice." The next several hours were a blur of activity as federal agents arrived to take Hayes into custody and begin the process of unraveling the conspiracy that had cost Rebecca Martinez her life. The retired doctor's confession opened the door to a much larger investigation involving multiple government agencies and decades of cover-ups. Colonel Richard Stone, now in his 80s, was arrested at his home in Virginia. The two men who had assisted him in Rebecca's murder had both died in the intervening years, but their identities were known, and their families would finally learn the truth about their involvement in the conspiracy. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, Maria Santos stood outside the retirement community, finally feeling a sense of closure that had eluded her for nearly 2 decades. Rebecca Martinez would never come home, but her killers would face justice, and her evidence would ensure that the truth was finally revealed. The investigation that followed would expose a web of corruption and cover-ups that reached the highest levels of government. The unauthorized research project at Hoover Dam was just one of many similar operations that had put innocent workers at risk in the name of national security. Rebecca's dedication to protecting the health and safety of her patients had ultimately cost her life, but her carefully preserved evidence ensured that her sacrifice was not in vain. The workers who had been sickened by the experimental compounds would receive compensation and medical care, and new safety protocols would be implemented to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The metal footlocker that had preserved Rebecca's evidence for 18 years was eventually placed in the Smithsonian Institution as a testament to the courage of those who speak truth to power, even when it costs them everything. Dr. Patterson returned to his archaeological work with a renewed appreciation for the power of buried truths to change the present. Sarah Mitchell implemented new safety protocols at Hoover Dam and established a memorial fund in Rebecca Martinez's name to support healthcare workers who advocate for patient safety. Tommy Chen continued his engineering career, but never forgot the lesson that Rebecca's story had taught him about the importance of speaking up when something is wrong, regardless of the personal cost. And Detective Maria Santos, finally able to close the case that had defined her career, spent her remaining years working with families of missing persons, helping them find the closure that had taken her 18 years to achieve. Rebecca Martinez had been silenced for nearly 2 decades, but her voice had finally been heard, and justice had been served. That concludes our 4-part story about the discovery at Hoover Dam and the tragic fate of nurse Rebecca Martinez. This tale reminds us that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of eventually coming to light through the dedication of those who refuse to give up. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us which city you're watching from, as we continue to bring you compelling stories like this one every day. Your engagement and support mean everything to us, and we look forward to sharing more captivating narratives that explore the mysteries and human dramas that shape our world. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery and justice, and we'll see you tomorrow for another unforgettable story.